What's going on, guys? Billy here, and today we're going to be covering everything that you need to know about how to use DJI's Motion Controller with their brand new FPV drone. And once we go over all the ins and outs of how this remote works, then we're going to go on a full flight with it with the FPV drone so I can give you guys some tips and tricks and some best practices on how to fly using this controller, and I'll give you some of my feedback on what it's like to use the Motion Controller. So because this is an accessory that's purchased separately, the first thing that we have to do is link the Motion Controller to the drone. We can do so by holding the power button on the drone's battery and by holding the power button on the controller. You'll hear a confirmation beep once they've successfully connected. Now, chances are there's also going to be a firmware update that you need to do, so you want to plug your mobile device into the goggles and check on this by using the DJI Fly app. Now, as for the remote itself, it's really comfortable in the hands and uses your wrist motion to control the direction of the drone. There are, of course, a number of buttons around the remote to further control certain operations of the drone. So, of course, on the right side, we have the power button to turn the remote on and off, and on the top is a set of LEDs to understand our battery level and connection status. On the front side of the remote is the red lock button, which is used to engage the motors on the ground with a double press and then take off with a long press. The larger brake button here can be used to brake the aircraft with a single press and return to home with a long press. You can also cancel the return home action by pressing that same brake button. Now, the final button on the front side of the remote here is the mode switch, which brings us back and forth from the slower normal mode to the faster sport mode. Moving on to the side of the remote is a slider to control the tilt of the gimbal and a record and shutter button, which can be pressed to take a photo or start and stop a recording, as well as long pressed to switch between photo and video mode. The final input on this remote controller is the accelerator trigger on the back side. The more that you pull this, the faster the drone will move forward. Now, to wrap up our walk around of the Motion Controller, on the bottom side there's a spot to attach a wrist strap as well as a USB-C port for updating the firmware and charging the Motion Controller. Now, something else I should also mention is that there is a menu set within the goggles that controls some of the settings of the Motion Controller, but there's not a whole lot to choose from. So we can take a look at some of the tutorials they have on how to fly with the Motion Controller, and we can also tweak what the display looks like in the goggles as we're flying around, but I'd recommend keeping that display on. I think the biggest thing you can do within the goggles is calibrate the compass, the IMU, as well as the accelerator. So if you find that your Motion Controller just isn't working properly, make sure you come in here and you calibrate either the compass, IMU, or accelerator so that you can get normal flight with the Motion Controller. All right, so at first it's a little bit difficult to understand the different controls that are here on the Motion Controller. I mean, it's not like any other remote that we've seen with any DJI drone, or really any drone from any manufacturer, that is. Nothing from Autel, nothing from Skydio. This is really one of a kind. And when you look at it, you kind of get confused. So what we're gonna do is a full flight here using the Motion Controller from land to takeoff. And I find the taking off portion is a little bit more difficult than using just a traditional remote controller, especially with this drone, but we'll get to that when we actually get to the landing portion. So we'll go ahead, we'll put the goggles down, get out of the menu section here. And in order to take off, we will double press the lock button, which does arm the motors, and you can also double press to actually unarm the motors. So if you arm the motors and it's sitting there and you think, okay, I want to wait for a second, you can unarm the motors. Just a little quick tip there. So double press to arm, long press to take off. The drone is going to lift up to about 3.5 feet, and from here we can just begin flying. So we'll shoot up. We pointed the remote straight up, so we'll shoot straight up like that. Kind of get our bearings here, and we'll just start going. We'll squeeze the trigger all the way. So right now we're just in the normal mode, just cruising. And right now I've got the remote level so that we're just flying straight. But if I wanted to go down, I would tilt the remote down. This is really a cool feeling. I would tilt the remote down and the drone would fly downwards. But if I wanted to come up, I would then tilt the remote controller up, like so. Now, this is a little bit slow, so I'm going to use the mode button here to flip into sport mode. And now we are going to be cruising a lot faster. Wow. All right, so now we're cruising at about 60 miles an hour. We're going to lap this bird. We're doing about 61 miles an hour. There's some wires down here, if you guys remember from my flight video, so we'll pull the drone up. It's a really intuitive experience. Like, it feels more natural than using a remote controller, but I'm afraid that it doesn't feel as precise as using a remote controller. All right, so now if we get to here, and let's say we want to stop, I'll pull off the accelerator, and the drone is going to come to a stop. So you don't have to press the brake button every time you want to stop, but now you've got to wonder, like, if I want to completely turn around, what do I do, right? Because it's kind of weird. So what I'd recommend doing is turning the remote, pressing the brake button, so now it's holding. I'll recenter my remote, unbrake, spin back around, brake, recenter myself, unbrake, and now I'm good to start flying. So that brake button, while it's great to use for braking, obviously, right? Like let's say I'm flying and I get in trouble, I can just tap on the brake button and the drone comes to a stop. That's great, but you can also control that with your accelerator. So what I find that brake button really helpful for is repositioning yourself. If you want to go and spin all the way around, press the brake button, it'll stop the movement from the remote controller, and then using the remote controller, you can kind of recenter yourself. So in my flight video I did here with the remote controller, I did things like go under the bridge. I went and I flew down near the train, and I just don't think that I'm going to feel comfortable enough to be doing that type of flying with the motion controller. Like, this is a ton of fun to be flying around while you're outside, but I don't think that I'd be doing close maneuvers with the motion controller here. So we're gonna pull the drone all the way up. Let's see, we can get a vertical speed of, wow, about 33 miles an hour. So we were flying 33 miles an hour high, which is pretty great. Now again, we're sitting here and we want to turn around. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna brake. I'm gonna totally, let's see. I'm going to brake. Huh. It's a little bit stuck, it seems. Oh, duh. I'm gonna spin the remote like this, all the way around. I'm gonna brake, spin it back around, unbrake, and then go. All right, user error there. But again, this is a very different experience. I would say that this is probably my 6th, 7th flight with the remote. I'm gonna buzz us here. You know, as I continue to fly with it, I do feel myself getting a little bit more comfortable with it. I almost feel like I can almost get even more control with this than the actual remote. Now we're buzzing down some train tracks, and even if I get in trouble, you know what, I know that there's some wires down here, and my goggles are beeping at me because it knows that, you know what, I'm gonna come to a stop here. The one thing that I have to say that I'm a little bit worried about, is like range with this drone, right? Or with this remote controller, because on the backside of the standard RC, you've got a nice big antenna that's, you know, able to connect to the drone at longer ranges. But what is that like with the motion controller? There's no big antenna on here. You know what? All right, I'm feeling really confident, so I'm gonna try and go underneath of the bridge. So go ahead, we'll stop, spin around, brake. Although, you know what? Because I'm a little bit of a wuss, I think we're gonna do it in the normal mode. We're flying pretty close to the water here. Now, what fun would that be? We're going in sport. Oh, I felt like I was really close to the water there. Alrighty. So right now we're at about 42% battery. We've been cruising around pretty much the whole time in sport mode. Let's go ahead and do a full bank all the way around. Bring it back around. So anytime you want to turn around, you don't have to use the brake button to lock the controller. The real reason that I was using the brake button is only when you want to spin around like on a dime, like if you were hovering and you want to spin in that very location. So we're at about 30% battery left. We're gonna buzz down a little bit further and then bring her back here. I mentioned to you guys that the landing portion is kind of what gets me here, because landing the drone is a little bit difficult, right? Obviously we can pitch the gimbal downwards, so we're gonna come and hover directly over ourselves here, and while we can tilt, you know what, it's gonna try to return home by itself, but we're gonna hit the brake button, it's gonna cancel the RTH. So we can look downwards, right? But we can't look directly down. So from here, look at that. So within the remote controller, it is displaying, or I'm sorry, not within the remote controller, but within the actual goggles, it's displaying where the drone is gonna land. That is super helpful. So from here, we'll hold the brake button. It's returning to home, so it's flying a little bit over, and now it's just going to land. You see, with using the remote controller, or sorry, the motion controller, using the like auto land and auto return home function is going to be very important because you don't have that tactile precision to come straight down with the motion controller as you do with like a stick. So you're pretty much gonna fully rely on the drone to land itself. And it looks like it's doing a pretty good job. I've got the gimbal tilted downwards. Sweet, awesome. It's gonna come down nice and slow, cool. All right, so that was a great flight with the motion controller. Again, it was only like my 5th or 6th time, and this was really my first full flight. I've done a couple of maneuvers around, but I've got to say that it really did feel more comfortable as I continued to move forwards and fly with it. So I've got to say that it's a completely different experience, and it's something that I don't think you should buy like right off of the bat, because this is a fairly expensive drone coming in at $1,300. If you want to buy care refresh and some extra batteries, you might not have the room to pick up the motion controller, but I do think that you should keep it in the back of your mind for when you get a little bit bored of flying the FPV drone and you want a brand new experience, you pick this up, because it's definitely not a gimmick. I thought at first it might be gimmicky. It's like, okay, you get, you know, the ability to fly around using motion, but I actually felt like it was a little bit more immersive than using just the remote controller. So it's definitely different, it's definitely cool, it's definitely fun, and if you guys enjoyed this flight, be sure to let me know down in the comment section below. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed, and as always, I'll talk to you later. Peace.